What's happening? The weather once again has struck down upon us, and I'm now inside. And I don't think I've filmed a video inside for a few months, but finally the weather has caught up. And I did promise yesterday that yesterday's video needed a follow up and a part two. So today I'm bringing it to you. Yesterday we spoke about the superficial answers, and today we're going to sort of add on to that and discuss superficial thinking, and how superficial thinking is a massive flaw in a person's reflective mind. If we start with reflection, reflection isn't always the rational answer, the rational decision, the rational thought. Because a lot of the time, thinking deeply doesn't guarantee that what we're thinking is actually clear, where we can end up just sort of thinking about lots of different things rather than just an important one that's actually going to stick and be worthwhile building on, especially an important decision that has to be made. We also sort of use our own reflection and our own examples of reflection to defend beliefs that we have that are actually flawed, that we're not willing to further reflect because we sort of want to trust that superficial thought that we had. But intelligence and insight, that can serve as a bias just as easily as the truth, which is how we get to the point of having a superficial thought rather than one that we believe in wholeheartedly. There's a massive comfort in justified beliefs, ones that we tell ourselves we want to believe in, even though over the time, people's and our own beliefs and reasons can change for actually having that thought. And it's a lot of the time, it's once we adopt an idea, like I said yesterday, once we have something in our head, a lot of the time we're gonna stick to it. But really, we need to reflect on that, and especially if it's something that actually is the right thought to have rather than a superficial one, we have to work to protect that thought and not continue to question ourselves and give ourselves multiple scenarios where one of them will be wrong. And especially in the case where you've actually got the right answer straight away and the right thought straight away, the one that is correct and right to carry with. We don't want to keep questioning ourselves because then we'll spiral out of control. Our mind, it frames doubt as a threat rather than a tool. And a lot of the time, we need to use our mind and go and instead of trying to sort of being naive, we have to sort of be intuitive and go, maybe on this scenario, I'm actually right, and I'm gonna go with what I actually think because it might actually be right this time. There's also overconfidence in depth of our lives, and I made a video last week about the overconfidence in this generation now, and it's massive. But a lot of the time it happens in our reflective mind, where people confuse complexity and development of points for insight, when really you could just be saying like loads of like big words and stuff like that, when really, does it have any substance? A lot of the time, we spend so much of that time on a thought rather than a solution. And we become more invested in this just thought and whether it's actually valid or right, when really, like I said, we've got to hold that intuition and go, I am right, and back ourselves rather than keep questioning it. There's also an intellectual confidence, and it can mask these internal blind spots where We are wrong. And it's like when you're driving a car, there's a blind spot, and you can't see the problem or someone pulling out on you in that blind spot because you're going at it blind. And it's the same with thinking. If you approach something blind, unless you're completely confident and hold that intellectual confidence, you do need to find another way around it. There's also a disguise in sophisticated superficiality, where some of our thoughts sound deep at the time and in our head, not written down. But a lot of the times this can come across as sort of empty nonsense, where you might think of something in your head and then you might say it out loud and you go, what am I going on about? Like, what I am saying right now is absolute nonsense. And sometimes, like I said, we can use language that we wouldn't normally use, this abstract language, these big words. And what this does, it actually just sort of conceals the lack of clarity that we actually have. We are so adamant that we are correct and hold all the answers and the information, when really we don't. And we often don't notice when we're dressing up our shallow thoughts, where are we just making them a bigger issue? Are we making these thoughts complex? And really, there's a simple solution. And we are just using this complexity when we don't need to be. There's also a self-deception through thoughtfulness. And what I mean by this is that we tell ourselves all the time that we're thinking critically. And it's something that I've told you and I've told myself this whole year, that I'm approaching things more critically and more and differently to how I was before. But the thing with this is that this is in reflection every day. That whilst it's in my head at first, a lot of the time what is in my head is sort of a phrase, a point, a word, a reason. And what I'll do is I'll reflect on these points and I'll actually build on what they actually mean, which is what I'm doing right now in terms of things that are superficial. When we think we're thinking critically, a lot of the time, we are just sort of thinking rationally. We're thinking not in that unique way or that overcritical way. We are just thinking how the brain is made to think, and that is rationally. We're made to think right. And the reflective mind, it can become that defense mechanism for our ego, where our ego sort of wants us to go places, wants us to do things, wants us to achieve the good side of our ego that I've discussed before. But a lot of the time in reflection, we're trying to find a reason or way out to make the process longer because we're not 100% sure. And this reflective mind is what then becomes that barrier to success in our ego. And a lot of the time, sophistication becomes the smokescreen, smoke and mirrors for emotional avoidance, where we might try and come across in a certain way, in a certain intellect of sophistication, but really sometimes we need to approach a person, approach a thought with that emotional rationality, where we're not overthinking it and we're not trying to avoid a conversation or a person because we don't feel a certain way. We just need to approach it as ourselves. So what is the real work of reflection in our brain? True reflection, it requires this uncomfortable honesty with ourselves and others. And what it means that we question our thoughts, even the ones that feel most like our own. Like I said, I have these thoughts. I come out of nowhere. But all I get initially is that thought, is that word. So what I do is I question it. I write it down and I develop it and go, do you know what? I've only sort of hit the tip of the iceberg here. And there's still a lot more I've got to learn, a lot more I've got to understand. and a lot more I've got to share. Because whilst I'm just sitting at the tip of the iceberg, as we know of icebergs, at the bottom of the ocean, it keeps going. And real depth in our life isn't how long we think for. Like I said, things can just pop into my head and I'll write them down. Boom, I'm done. It's how we're willing to build on these thoughts and rethink where, yes, we've got an initial opinion. However, it could also be a wrong opinion where then we need to restructure and rethink our thoughts to then go, actually, there's actually something else. So then rather than looking to the superficial thoughts that we're initially thinking, we need to use our reflective mind for good, for right, and use our time that we've got in reflection to get to where we want to be.